Here's another horoscope where we'll look at the Hora. To start with, we'll look at simply see if there's more planets in desirable Horas or undesirable. So the Sun is in its own Hora, in the Sun's Hora, which is good. The Moon is in the Sun's Hora, which is not preferred. Mars is in the Moon's Hora, which is not preferred. Mercury is in the Hora of the Moon, and since Mercury is in an even sign in Pisces, Mercury is in a good Hora. Jupiter's in the Hora of the Moon, where we want him in the Hora of the Sun, so not really ideal. Venus is in the Hora of the Sun, not ideal. And Saturn's in the Hora of the Moon. So we've basically got 1, 2, 3 planets that are in appropriate Horas or desirable Horas, and 4 planets that are not in the best Horas. So it's a 50-50 chart. Okay? 3 or 4 is 50% about, average chart. So this person has the average capacity to find satisfaction in their responsibilities. And again, we'll look at each of the planets a little later. We'll just kind of go through our handout again. So 3 of those 7 planets will fructify more satisfaction for this person. The Moon's the most important planet in the Hora chart. This person's Moon in the Hora is looking pretty good. It's in Cancer. Okay, so it's in its own sign. That right away is going to show there's a strong desire to fulfill their responsibilities and the type of person who will feel satisfied upon fulfilling their responsibilities. One thing, life is so full of responsibilities. So much what we have to do are things that we have to do, that we're responsible for. And if a person can find satisfaction in those things, life is so much better. And that's what a good Moon in the Hora chart represents. That a person can actually find satisfaction in their responsibilities. Some people just can't find any satisfaction in fulfilling their responsibilities. They just want to do other things. They want to play, they want to party, whatever, but they don't find satisfaction in their responsibilities. And having satisfaction in our responsibilities is a huge part of happiness in life. Okay? So this person, like the chart we looked at in the previous video actually that had Moon in Taurus, this person has a nice Moon in the Hora. So they actually can find satisfaction in fulfilling their responsibilities. But how much? Well, there's a couple problems with the Moon. The first is that the Moon is in the Hora of the Sun. Not the best place for it. The person in general will find more satisfaction in their responsibilities if the Moon's in the Hora of the Moon, because so much of responsibilities have to do with the people that we're closely involved with. And the Moon in the Moon's Hora feels more connected to those people. The Moon in the Hora of the Sun doesn't have that same feeling of connection to people, so responsibilities that include people are just not going to be as satisfactory. But still, the person with the good Moon here still has a, understanding that fulfilling the responsibilities can make me really happy. The other thing that's bothering the Moon is that it's conjunct Saturn in the Rashi chart. This means that this Moon is going to be starved by Saturn in Shuddhita Avashta in every Varga chart. This is a starved Moon. Okay, a planet that's conjunct Saturn in the Rashi gets starved in all Vargas because we take the conjunctions as per the Rashi, right? So this person's a starved person. So how much satisfaction are they going to have? In the Hora, though the Moon is strong in its own sign, Saturn's also strong in its own sign. So this makes the person more emotionally starved in general, and that makes it less fulfilling to fulfill their responsibilities, less satisfaction. And in fact, in this person, because they're feeling so starved with their own life, it's always been really hard for them to take care of responsibilities of the other living things that are dependent upon them, like their house plants, their cats, and the other people in their life. They just don't have any energy to take care of those living beings because they themselves are just feeling so starved all the time because of this starved Moon. And that directly influences their responsibilities really strongly due to the fact that Saturn is so strong in the Hora. It's a strong Saturn, it's in Capricorn, so it's going to squeeze the life out of the Moon more. Okay, it's an awake Saturn. Let's see if there's any planets helping the moon. Sun, his friend, is helping to 8 points, and the sun's exalted, so that gives a little bit of help. Mars is a neutral of the moon, Jupiter's a neutral, Venus is a neutral. So sun is helping a little bit, but not enough to make it a nice moon. The moon is nice because it's in its own sign, but then it gets starved because it's with Saturn, conjunct Saturn, and Saturn's as strong as the moon, roughly. So this person's moon is average. It's not as great as it looks like just being in Cancer in the first house. It's not as great in first impression gives you because it is starved. So it does make it a lot harder for this person to find satisfaction in their responsibilities. And that combined with the moon being in the Hora of the sun, they're just not that personable when it comes to fulfilling their responsibilities. Whether they do it for a loved one or a stranger, it really feels the same to them. Okay? So the moon's just so here, not in a great, and not in a great Hora, being in the Hora of the sun. Okay? After the moon, we always want to look at the important bhavas, right? Second bhava is the most important bhava. The sun rules the second, and the sun's exalted. Okay, so the second bhava lord is Garvita, proud, and proud because it has capacity. So that gives us a clue that this person looks so far to be very capable of fulfilling their responsibilities and getting the money they need when they need it. But let's see what else is influencing the sun. There's no conjunctions to the sun. In the Rashi chart, it's aspected, by the moon to 31 points, and the moon is strong in Cancer, so that's a nice help of a friend. By Mars, a friend, who's in a natural neutral sign, so helps a little. By Jupiter, a friend, so that helps a little. Jupiter's in a natural neutral sign too. Then by Saturn, the sun's influence very powerfully to 50 points. And Saturn, of course, is an enemy, and Saturn's a strong enemy, being awake in his own sign in the Hora. So, if we add up 31, 6, and 8, it equals close to 50. Okay? So, these are roughly average. Saturn's a little stronger, and the sun's exalted. So the sun is Garvita, proud. The mudita, the light it picks up from the aspects of the moon, Mars, and Jupiter get, canceled by the misery, the starvation of Saturn to the sun. But still, the sun's exalted, so it is Garvita. So this person takes a lot of pride in their capacity to fulfill their responsibilities. And if you talk with this person after a little while, one of the things they're going to start talking to you about is some of the miracles that they've pulled off when they needed money. Like once they needed $50,000 for an operation, or else there was a good chance they just weren't going to make it. And, a week later, they were able to pull together $50,000 just by a chance meeting with somebody on the streets. At a bus stop, two guys were talking about something. She put them in contact with somebody. They made $1 million deal, and she got a $50,000 commission. So, this person has that prosperity, which is the prosperity of the second Varga, of the Hora Varga, which is being able to get what you need when you need it. Okay, that's the Hora. It's not the Chaturtamsha having all kinds of money in the bank. The Hora is that prosperity of getting what you need to fulfill your dharma in your life, your purpose in life, and to survive, to fulfill that so that you can live that purpose. So this person is very proud of their ability to do that, okay? Because of the Saturn influence to the moon, because of that starvation to the moon, this person's always worried about making ends meet, even though they have a great capacity to do it. Because again, the moon is the most important planet in that chart, okay? The second Lord Sun is also in the Hora of the Sun where it wants to be. So this gives the person, more of a dynamic quality to make things happen, the ability for sacrifice when necessary, the ability to sacrifice their desires and their social needs in order to do what they have to do, to get where they need to in life and to fulfill the responsibilities they need to. So they really are good at that, okay? Now, how's the second bhava? The second bhava is aspected by its lord, the sun, who's exalted to 23 points, by the moon, who's in its own sign to 48 points, by Mars in a friend sign to 13 points, by Mercury, who's in an enemy sign. Actually, I'm sorry, Mars is in a neutral sign in this chart. He's in a natural friends, but he's a neutral dignity, so he doesn't help the second Baba. Mercury's in an enemy sign, so he hurts the second Baba, but just to 3 points, pretty negligent. Jupiter's in neutral dignity. You can see that neutral here for Jupiter. Venus is debilitated, so he's going to hurt the second house, but just to 10 points. Saturn is aspecting the 46 points. He's going to help because he's in a good dignity in his own sign. So this is a great second house. A person has a great second house. They fulfill their responsibilities, even if it requires a miracle. Okay, I mean, how many people you know who can pull a $50,000 check out of a hat in a week? Okay, pretty amazing. So this person's got a great capacity to fulfill their responsibilities in general because that second house gives them that good fortune. However, the moon is still starved, and so there is worrisomeness revolving around that. Okay. The other important house is the third house. In this person's chart, the third house falls in Aquarius. Its lord is Saturn, is awake in its own sign in Capricorn. So the Saturn, the third lord, is good. Okay. Aspected by the Sun, its enemy, to 10 points. So that's going to hurt Saturn. By Mars to 60 points, and Mars is in a natural friend sign, so he can give a half value of starvation to Saturn. Or actually, because he's an enemy and malefic, that's Shobita, that's agitation. So he's agitating Saturn. Jupiter's in neutral. Venus is a friend, but can't really help Saturn because he's in, debilitation, so he's sleeping and he can't help his friend Saturn. So we've got some good doses of enemies aspecting Saturn, and Saturn works to withstand that based on, being in its own sign. So this is a mediocre strength Saturn, just so-so. Not as great as it looks at first impression because it is influenced by some enemies. So it's a decent third house. The person shows relatively good courage and initiative and, making their, fulfilling their responsibilities. Their ability to work as a team to fulfill their responsibilities is average. Nothing unusual either way. Fourth Baba is ruled by Mercury. Mercury is in a natural neutral sign and in an enemy dignity, though. So not a great Mercury. Mercury is influenced by enemy moon to 13 points, who's a strong moon, so take, hurting Mercury to a full 13. By friend or neutral Mars and neutral Jupiter, neither of which are helping, and then by neutral Saturn too. Mercury is also conjunct Venus, his friend, but Venus is sleeping in the Hora chart, so he can't help his friend Mercury. So overall, this Mercury doesn't have a lot of juice to it. Okay, it's not a terrible Mercury, but it has no juice to do anything. The fourth Baba itself is influenced by exalted Sun, by Moon from its own sign, by Mars in neutral sign, who's not going to do anything, by Mercury in enemy sign, but that's his lord, so he won't ruin the Baba, but he sure can't help it. It's influenced by Venus to 44 points, and Venus is debilitated, so really hurting it, and by Saturn to 30 points, okay, which is going to help it. So it's a mediocre fourth Baba and a terrible fourth Lord, okay. So their wealth has not really manifested much as property. They grew up in Venus Dasha, and of course, they had no chance of sinking their money into property during that time with Venus being debilitated in that chart, in the Hora chart. After that was the Sun Dasha, and while the Sun is influencing the fourth Baba as an exalted planet to 18 points, the Sun rules the second Baba here, and so that made it more time of getting their finances together than it was invested in property. But the fourth house Lord being real mediocre and then the fourth, or bad, and the fourth being mediocre. The weakest thing in the Hora is that fourth house. And again, that also has to do with the happiness a person gets from fulfilling their responsibilities. And that also is just not as great as their capacity to fulfill their responsibilities, unfortunately. Okay? So this Hora chart has some really strong things, namely the second house. They really can get the money together that they need when they need it. But there's not that much happiness in fulfilling their responsibilities because the fourth house is not very good, and because the moon is starved by Saturn. It's not a great moon. Okay? And you'll notice that in general, about anyone who has Saturn conjunct the moon in their Rashi chart, they have a starved moon, which means fulfilling responsibilities is going to feel like a burden. Because when your moon is starved, you just feel like a weight with you all the time. Okay? You always feel an element of stress that makes it really hard to do anything above and beyond just getting through the day sometimes. Okay, and then because Saturn's strong in the Hora, it's able to starve the moon more. Okay, this person is first Hora of Cancer, and this really symbolizes this person. The first Hora in the fourth sign is a woman who holds a blossoming lotus in her hand. She stands in the water, pale as the color of a kampaka flower. Her upper garment and ornaments are pale like moonbeams. Her limbs are adorned with the splendor of full and half necklaces. So, this person is really not, this image of kind of pale, delicate beauty is in this person really strongly, you know. Blossoming lotus, that's the person who's actively developing spiritually, okay. It's not fully blossomed, but it's in the process of blossoming. This person is very much like that. Stands in the water, that means an emotionally centered person, somebody who approaches things from the point of view of I need this or I don't need this, you know, from an emotional need, not just an intellectual, practical need. Her upper garment and ornaments are pale like moonbeams, so that gives that element of receptivity. Her limbs are adorned with full and half necklaces. Full necklaces represent the accomplishments that they've done. Half necklaces represent the accomplishments that they're really hard to work on at this time. And that's very true about this person. They're always working on the next accomplishment that they can succeed in, always developing. Leaning on the branch of an ioka tree in a garden, she recalls to mind her beloved. So, you know, a romantically centered person who wants love to be something that grows in their life. She wears a golden girdle, and a necklace trembles on her breast. So a necklace trembling on the breast symbolizes a person whose heart is a little nervous, but which has a lot of gold in it. And a golden girdle, this, you know, the belt, a golden girdle, that indicates a lot of inner strength and reserve, which this person has. So this image really vibes with this person. I always find these Hora images really do vibe well with the person. When we compare that to the Lagna's Hora, and we go to Hora in Cancer. In the first half of Cancer, one will be endowed with an elevated body, a beautiful head, emergence and intelligence, be weak-sighted, have limbs moving off and on, be crafty, dark in complexion, ungrateful, and have broken teeth. Well, interesting enough, this person has an elevated body. I mean, they're tall, and they really hold themselves to be tall. A beautiful head, that could be true. Extremely intelligent, this person. They have problems with their eyes. They're not dark in complexion. They're actually quite fair because of their race. Ungrateful, yeah, that could be said for this person to some degree. They've had a lot of, when people do things for them, they're usually not one to retaliate the favor. Broken teeth, the person has had tooth problems. In fact, had root canal infections that were so bad it ruined her whole immune system. And so that she had chronic fatigue until the time came when she had her root canals all cleaned out. And it took years for somebody to finally find out for her that it was really bad teeth infections, root canal infections in her teeth that were depleting her immune system. Crafty, there's an element of craftiness in this person. So, quite accurate description of this person. A wretched man, the limbs in whose body are broken, This person doesn't have any bodily broken limbs, as according to this other source. But otherwise, relatively good interpretation for this person. Why is this one really so accurate for this person? It's most likely because the Lagna Lord in the Hora is strong. Okay? The Lagna Lord, like I said, in the Hora is strong by being in the Lagna in its own sign. So that makes the Hora Lagna picture a stronger picture in their life. Okay, let's see what's next here. We did that. Okay, we've already looked at the moon, and we've seen that the moon's not in an ideal Hora. The sun, however, is. The sun is exalted in the Hora. Rules the second house, the most important house in the Hora, and it's in its own Hora, in the Hora of the sun. So this is a great sun. This person has a huge capacity for sacrifice of emotional things in order to do what they have to do. Okay? But that combined with the weak Hora, the moon being in a bad Hora, in the Hora of the sun, which means that she doesn't really make intimate connections very well, and going about being the solar person that she is, she very easily can neglect the feelings of people that she's close to, because the moon's just not as attuned to those people, because the moon's in the Hora of the sun. So the moon being in the Hora of the sun and the sun being in the Hora of the sun just makes her treat people more impersonally. Okay? It's a nicer balance when the sun can go out there and do the impersonal things, but the moon is in the Hora of the moon, so it can still maintain its personal connections while it does so. Okay? So this is a person that's always going to leave the people she loves to do what she has to, without a lot of empathy for the other people's needs as well. Okay? Alright, Hora Lords of other planets. The other planets that are in a good Hora is Saturn. It's in the Hora of the moon. So this is good. She's had a lot of people in her life that have been validating mentors and people who really cared for her and loved her. And even though she has not really been able to connect to those people in a fully intimate way, having those people that really think highly of her and validating her and accepting her for herself has done a lot to help heal her psychology. But it's because the moon's in the Hora of the sun, and Venus, the planet of intimate relationships and love, is in the Hora of the sun too. They just don't have that capacity to feel really personal with their relationships. Unfortunately, so they don't make those deep bonding connections. I mean, that's contributed to them not having, longevity in their relationships, because they just aren't bonding with the same level of family feeling to people, with personal feeling to people. Okay, Mercury is the other planet that's in a good Hora. Mercury represents friends and everything, and friends that we have in our life that we fulfill responsibilities with. And this person has that capacity for really caring friendship, because Mercury is in the Hora of the moon and it's in an even sign. And so when this person has a dear friend to spend time with, they really are present and with them. However, because Mercury is debilitated in the Rashi chart and in an enemy sign in the Hora chart, this person has few good friends. But the few good friends they have, they really care about them, and they're really happy to spend a weekend and only spend time with that person or go on a vacation with that person. So they really, cherish the friendship when their fate gives it to them. But it doesn't give them to them enough, simply because Mercury's debilitated in the Rashi and sleeping in the Hora. Okay? Jupiter, the planet of abundance, wisdom, and abundant money, is in the Hora of the moon. So this person isn't able to give of their abundance freely in an element with a spirit of sacrifice of giving it to anybody. They're always, it only goes to the things that they immediately need to take care of. The wisdom they give, they get paid for, and they do it in order to fulfill their family and personal responsibilities. So Jupiter's not that satisfied because it's not giving of wisdom and abundance to the degree that it really wants to. Did we cover all of them? Oh, Mars. Mars is in the Hora of the moon too. So This is not a person whose Mars is going to let them be the hero for strangers, to be the impersonal hero that just helps people out of trouble whenever they encounter them. Their Mars instead will be directed more towards taking care of their very own business. That's more personal, but that will be more, won't be as exciting and satisfying to Mars. So average satisfaction in this person's Hora. Now, the other thing we sort of want to look at here is what we're going to do in this chart that we didn't do in the previous one. I think we sort of covered everything quickly. Oh yeah, there's a yogas. Let's go through those yogas real quick. Okay, this person is an even Lagna and the Hora's moon. Fearless in speech, lazy, and fond of a virtuous wife. Well, they're fearless in speech, no doubt about it. This person really speaks their mind. They really take their time with things. Fond of a virtuous wife. They definitely are proud of their partners and, like to talk about their partner's virtues and things. Okay. Okay, some of the Horas. If the Lagna falls in the Hora of the moon, the current will be happy in his childhood and face difficulties in his later life. Well, the truth is this person really didn't have a happy childhood. That sutra, the way you have to use it is, are they more plugged into their family? And this person was very plugged into their family. The Lagna was in the Hora of the moon. They had a lot of affection with their father. Unfortunately, their father committed suicide at 15, but her and their father were like inseparable until about a year before she turned 15. And so there was a lot of closeness there, but she didn't have good relations with her mother or her elder siblings. So family life was not an easy family for this person. You can look at family afflictions here if you want to. The one sutra you have to look at it were how connected were they to their family. Well, this person was very connected to their family. They didn't sort of live away from their family or stand away from their family. They were really connected to their family, but they definitely had some tough family fate. Later in life, with the Hora of the moon, it's definitely some things have been a struggle to this person, but not too big of a deal. With this great sun in the Hora chart and this good second house, they always are able to do what they have to do to get on with life. Okay? All right, let's look at their face. The Lord of the Hora is the moon, and the moon is in Capricorn with Saturn. So that will give the person, less attractive eyes and less attractive face. For this person, that didn't really hold true too much. This person has an unusual face, for sure, and they definitely have a Saturnian face in the sense of it being a skinny face, very lean, long sort of face, or a Saturnian face. However, probably because Saturn's in its own sign, it's not robbing the beauty out of them. Most people would say this person had a relatively attractive face. However, they have some scars on their head, on their forehead, basically, due to some violence in their life. Okay, so there is that to it. So maybe that's where some of that comes in. So their face isn't perfect by any means. All right, malefics in the sun's Hora and odd rashis, or benefics in even rashis and moon's Hora. That determines the force that the person will throw their personality at you in a more cruel way or a more gentle and graceful way. Sun is in male sign and sun's Hora. That's 2 points towards toughness. Mars is in a male sign but moon's Hora. So it gets 1 point for male sign, no point for moon's Hora. The other malefic, Saturn, is in even sign and moon's Hora. So it's a gentle Saturn. So 3 out of 6 possible points for the person being cruel as per that sutra. On the other one, the moon is in even sign. Moon is in even sign, gets a point, but does not get a point for sun. Oh, I'm sorry. The moon is actually waning in this person's chart, so it's a malefic. So that gives 4 points for being in the sun's Hora to malefics, and but not a point for being in an odd sign because it's in an even sign. So it's 4 to 8 points for malefics in this chart. 50-50, average personality that way. Benefics, Mercury's in female sign and moon's Hora. Venus is in female sign but sun's Hora, so just gets 1 point there. Jupiter's in male sign but moon's Hora. Gets a point for moon's Hora. So it gets 4 out of a possible 6 points for the benefics. So this person's going to, in general, come off as relatively gentle, diplomatic, and not overbearing. More of a pleasant, easygoing person to get to meet and to deal with on a basic level. Okay? And that's relatively true for this person. When you first meet this person, you'll really enjoy their, the little bit extra gentleness that they have to offer in general. But it's not a lot more because malefics are 50-50. It's just a little bit more of a gentle personality. Alright, let's look at their sibling. They have an older sibling. We'll just play with this rule again. The 11th cusp is in the Hora, 11th cusp has the sun, a male planet there. The 11th cusp falls at 2 degrees of Aries, which is the sun's Hora. So this person's elder sibling is going to be way more masculine. And that's very true of their elder sibling. Okay, their elder sibling was a very, strong-willed, masculine type personality, but it was still a female. So again, this rule works really good for showing the nature of the person, of the sibling, whatever, more so than it represents the actual gender of the person. Okay, some other things I wanted to do with this chart. I think we're done with the yogas, yeah. Those yogas are good to know, but you don't always have to apply them to every chart. Is just look at some of the other things in this person's life, their capacity to be satisfied in other things. Let's take the 9th house. The 9th Lord Sun is exalted. Okay, anytime, what are the things the person's going to be most satisfied with, right? Find the most satisfaction in. It's the planet that's in its own Hora and which is strong, or in the right Hora and which is strong. The sun is in the sun's Hora, that's the right Hora, and it's exalted. It's the best planet in the Hora chart. So anything that the sun rules are things that they'll have a sense of more satisfaction with. Okay? The sun rules the father. The 9th house is the parental influence of the father. Sun is Garvita, proud. This person's very proud of their father in so many ways. Their father, from a young age, spent all this extra time teaching them things, learning them different languages. So this kid was just always spending this great quality time getting, extra parenting from their father. And this gave this person a lot of strengths and intelligence and skills that most kids just don't have. Okay? Unfortunately, her father did commit suicide, I think 15 or 16, due to other things, but this person found a lot of satisfaction in their relationship with their father, which made the fact that he died so much harder. She didn't know he had committed suicide until she was like 30, though, because her mom kept it secretive. She just thought her father died, so it was really a heartbreak for her. But she really idolized her father and found a lot of satisfaction in him because we can see that in the Hora chart. Then we also see that the Hora, sun rules the 2nd house too. And of course, this is this person's great capacity, to make ends meet, to financially do what they need to do, and something else they found a lot of satisfaction in. Then we can go to like the weakest thing. Okay, some like planets that are not in the right Hora. Well, that's Venus. Venus is in the wrong Hora. It's in the Hora of the sun, and it's debilitated. Okay? So it's a sleeping Venus too. It's helped by its friend, Mercury, but since Mercury's in a neutral sign, he's conjunct Mercury here. Mercury's in a natural neutral sign, so he only can help a little bit, or somewhat. Now he helps 50%, so there's some help from Mercury there, but still it's a sleeping, debilitated Venus. Then the Venus is influenced by the moon to 19 points, and the moon is strong, so it's going to hurt him. by Mars and Jupiter neutrals, and then by friend Saturn. So Venus does pick up some strength from Saturn, his friend, which will give it some mudita. And so it's actually a decent Venus, but still it's going to be strained because it is debilitated. So areas that they're going to find a harder time finding satisfaction in are 11th and 5th house things. Okay? 5th house things are obviously like children and intelligence and education. Okay? Well, this person has not wanted to have children. First of all, they haven't had the desire to find satisfaction there, but they haven't had satisfaction because they don't have children. So there's no room for satisfaction there. 5th house is also education. This person's extremely educated. Ironically, and by extremely educated, I mean master's degree at 16. Okay? Graduating high school at 12. However, there was not a lot of satisfaction found in that. They didn't feel comfortable, as a 14-year-old in a university environment. It wasn't a satisfying experience. They never used their education in their career. They were a model from 16 onward for several years. Then after that, they became a psychic healer. And so this person never used all that great education they had. There was really no satisfaction from it, no financial returns from it either. So it's sort of ironic here. So we don't find a lot of satisfaction in 5th house matters. Okay? 12th house matters. Well, 12th house, especially in the Hora chart, is expenses. The things we have to put out to get through life in our expenses. So this person doesn't really find satisfaction in making expenses. An expense is something that we willingly pay, and we should be satisfied in paying that money because it gives us something in return. So this person has a hard time finding that satisfaction too. So 12th house and 2nd house things they find less satisfying. 12th house is also vacations, which is basically an expense, something we spend money on just for the sake of enjoyment. So this person doesn't find satisfaction in that. They're not the type of person that takes vacations because they just don't find the whole thing satisfying. So we can see what's more or less satisfying to the person. Now, 9th house is also their philosophy. They're very much embraced into their philosophy, and most of their satisfaction in life comes from their spiritual path. That's where most of it comes from, actually. Okay? And we already saw how great that sun is. Let's look at Saturn, though. Saturn rules the 7th house, and it's strong in its own sign. And it's in the moon's Hora, where it wants to be. So this would show a great capacity for satisfaction in relationships. However, Saturn's not as good as he looks at first, because he's conjunct the moon, and the moon is a natural enemy to Saturn. One of the things that makes a Saturn-Moon conjunction so tough is that not only is Saturn hurting the moon, but the moon is really hurting Saturn too. How's he hurting him? Because in everything in life we have to have an element of healthy detachment. The moon, when it's with Saturn, destroys Saturn's capacity for detachment. So Saturn normally has a great capacity for detachment, but when he's in conjunct the moon, he loses that. And everything becomes personal, and everything becomes egocentric. And that there keeps this person from Saturn being great, because it's starved by the moon. The need for detachment is starved. And so the person suffers. Otherwise, Saturn's influenced by the Sun, the 10 points, who's exalted and hurting him, by Jupiter, the 29 points, who's a neutral, and Venus, who's a friend, but a sleeping, debilitated friend who can't help. So this Saturn is actually more starved than it is good. The moon hurts Saturn as much as Saturn helps himself, and then the Sun starves Saturn a little bit more. So this is not a real satisfying, it's not a good karma Saturn in that chart. Looks at first like it is, but its strength is robbed by the moon and the Sun and Moon. And then Saturn, also I forgot to mention, is aspected by Mars, who's in a natural neutral sign really powerfully. So Saturn is actually in Shobita Avashta by having 3 malefics, who are its enemies, influencing it. Or, sorry, 2 of them, Sun and Mars, are its malefic enemies influencing it, which makes it Shobita, agitated. And then the moon is starving it by being conjuncted. So this moon, the Saturn, is really an unhappy Saturn. And because of their inability to be detached from things and taking everything personal, they're not able to have satisfaction in relationships. Even though that Saturn looks good at first point, it's not. They really want it. Saturn's in the moon, Saturn's receptive to it in a way, but the moon makes them too egocentric because the moon is the ego and not detached enough, which is Saturn. It's always funny to me how we always blame, oh, Saturn's killing my moon, they have a Saturn-moon conjunction and Saturn's beating up my moon. Well, the truth is, half of your trouble if you have a Saturn-moon conjunction is that the moon is ruining Saturn. It's only half that Saturn's ruining the moon. So there's certain combination of conjunctions that are really tough. Those are namely Saturn-moon and Saturn-sun and Saturn-Mars. Anytime Saturn's with any of those three planets, not only does Saturn hurt those planets as we'd expect, but those other planets which are natural enemies to Saturn are equally creaming Saturn. So then you get two planets that are really suffering and really starved. Okay? So this person doesn't actually have a lot of satisfaction in 7th house matters because it's just sheer worry and negativity and egocentric thinking that interferes because of that Moon-Saturn conjunction. So look at the Hora chart to see how satisfied a person is with their concrete whatever, their concrete relationship, the concrete effects of their 5th house education, the concrete money and vacations they spend, the concrete philosophy, what they really are doing philosophically. This person's very proud of that because the sun is so good. So you can read everything from the Hora chart. And if you want to do a full interpretation, do that. But it's always good to look at the stronger and weaker planets in the Hora chart and see what's more satisfactory and less satisfactory. Okay. Let's see if anything else needs to be said about that chart. I think that's enough right there. So anyway, this is a really interesting Hora chart. You first look at it and you go, wow, this is a powerful chart. There's two planets in own sign, one planet exalted. And it is really powerful in many ways. But also, there's a lot of battling going on. Moon and Saturn are fighting, Sun and Saturn are fighting, and so on. So you always have to look for those subtleties so you can see the whole picture of their lives. That's going on. Now, as this Hora chart shows, this person has had periods in their life where they've made lots of money. They were making $300,000 a year at one point. So you see that wealth there, that great second house, okay? But then you see the bad 4th house, and you see they never bought property with that money. They had lots of furnishings, they had a $30,000 rug, but it was all in an apartment, and never an actual property that they had purchased. Because of the bad 4th house in the Hora chart, their wealth did not manifest as property. So anyway, that would give you some ideas of how important the Hora chart is and how it really can reveal a lot of things about a person. And in fact, there's so many things about a person's life that you can read from the Hora chart better than the Rashi chart because, like concrete things, what do they have in their life? What are they taking care of? What do they deal with every day? You can get a lot more insight sometimes on the Hora chart than that. It's also interesting that we call this chart the Hora because in astrology, astrology is called Hora. There's different branches of astrology. One is Samhita, which is the calculation of the chart, and so on. And one is Hora, and Hora is what they actually call the branch of astrology of reading horoscopes, okay? And horoscope and Hora, same thing, right? And here we have a Hora chart. So it obviously must be important. Jaimini actually, in the last sutra of the first pada, pada in the first chapter, he says Hora Adaya Siddha, which means perfection from the Hora and etc. So again, he's emphasizing Hora. He didn't say from the Vargas. He decided to use Hora and others to signify the Vargas, giving us a hint that the Hora Varga is really a lot of importance. And then like the Yavana Jataka said about the Hora, which also emphasizes the importance of it. Where is that? Let's see. He says, the qualities of such things as the Horas, which are halves of sign, are diverse and have many natures, forms, colors, and characteristics of the unique creator of the world. So, the Horas represent the qualities and forms and colors of the creator of the world. They're the reflection of God. They are always in essence, position, characteristics, and form familiar to its internal form and characteristics, like a mirror and its image. This is produced not in its own substance, but in the world of men. So we have God, and God is like a mirror creating the world of men. And that's that same thing, that yoga, that yoga philosophy analogy they use, that, you look up and there's the moon, and then you put out a lot of pots, and you see the reflection of the moon in every pot. And that's what God is like. There's God, and then we are all just a reflection of God in the same way that the pots of water are reflecting the moon. Okay? And that's really what the sun and moon is. The sun is, the God. The moon is a reflection of that God. The sun is soul, and the moon is the manas, the manas where the jiva lives with ahamkara, the ego, the idea of separate existence. And we're more the moon, the ego, than we are the soul. We're like we have a soul, and the soul is manifesting everything, but really everything we're experiencing and doing, we're doing through the moon. That's why we calculate the dashas from the moon, not from the sun. That's why we do compatibility based on the moon, not the sun, and so on. That's why the moon basically is more important in Vedic astrology, because we're dealing with egocentric personalities, right? And the Hora chart is the chart that relates, the Varga chart that relates to the moon. So because the Hora chart is this reflection. So you could almost say that the Rashi chart is more, what God is manifesting as at a given moment, the sun. And the Hora chart is the individual entity that's being created at that moment, which is more the egocentric personality that deals with all the forms and things in the world. So you really have to look at the Hora chart if you really want to get a good picture of what the person's really like, and what they really are dealing with in life, and where their happiness is really coming from. The Hora chart's really important, just like to see how happy a person is in life. What's more important to look at, the sun or the moon? The moon, right? You know what I mean? Saturn sun people will not be as depressed as Saturn moon people, right? Saturn moon people will be more depressed than Saturn sun people. Same way, dissatisfaction shown in the Hora chart is going to be a lot more of a theme in a person's life and important in the person's life than dissatisfaction in the Rashi chart, or vice versa. So the Hora is really a chart, one of those charts that's meant to be read all the time for everything. Okay, we should approach everything with the Hora just as we do with the Rashi chart. And that's just how involved astrology is. It's so easy to just look at the Rashi and ignore the Vargas. That's why we only can read so much. If we want to read more, we need to apply the Vargas. And if we want to read it all, we have to read everything in all the Vargas. And that becomes impossible, right? So it's just a matter of learning things and reading what you need to deal with the situation at hand. Okay? Alright, thank you, and we'll have another example video shortly.